Before America loved pizza, pasta, and Italian celebrities, it hated Italians. In 1891, 11 Italian immigrants were killed by an American mob in New Orleans. Some of them had already been declared innocent. Today, Italian food is everywhere in America. Pizza, pasta, espresso. Italian names are on restaurants, movie screens, sports trophies, fashion brands, and political families. To many Americans, being Italian now means passion, family, style, food, music, and pride. But it was not always like that. There was a time when Italians in America were not admired. They were feared. They were mocked. They were treated as criminals before they even opened their mouths. And in some places, they were not even seen as fully American. This is the forgotten story of when America hated Italians. At the end of the 19th century, millions of Italians began leaving their homeland. Italy had only recently become one country. But for many people, especially in the South, life was brutal. Poverty was everywhere. Land was scarce. Jobs were unstable. Families were desperate. So they crossed the ocean. Between the 1880s and the early 20th century, more than 4 million Italians arrived in the United States. They came through places like Ellis Island. They arrived with small bags, old clothes, family names, Catholic prayers, regional dialects, and a dream. But America did not welcome them with open arms. Many Americans saw them as too poor, too Catholic, too foreign, too loud, too dark, too different. Newspapers described Italians as dangerous. Politicians called them impossible to assimilate. Employers used them for the hardest jobs, then blamed them for taking work away from others. They built railroads. They dug tunnels. They worked in mines. They carried bricks. They cleaned streets. They lived in overcrowded neighborhoods. And still, they were accused of being lazy, dirty, violent, and criminal. This was not just casual prejudice. It became a system. In the late 19th century, anti-immigrant feeling was rising across the United States. The country was facing economic problems, and immigrants were often blamed for taking American jobs. Italian immigrants, especially, faced brutal prejudice and hostility. And for Italians, one accusation became especially dangerous: the mafia. In cities like New Orleans, Sicilian immigrants were often treated as if every man with an Italian surname was automatically part of a criminal conspiracy. Then, in 1890, New Orleans Police Chief David Hennessy was murdered. The city needed someone to blame. The mayor pointed toward Sicilian gangsters. More than 100 Sicilian Americans were rounded up. Eventually, 19 men were put on trial. Many were found not guilty, because there was not enough evidence. But for the mob, innocence did not matter. On March 14th, 1891, thousands of people gathered outside the parish prison in New Orleans. They broke in. They dragged Italian men from their cells. And they killed 11 of them. 11 Italians. Some had already been acquitted. Others had not even received a final verdict.
They were not killed by a secret gang. They were killed by a mob. In broad daylight. In an American city. The New Orleans lynching of 1891 became the largest mass lynching of Italian Americans in United States history. The shock reached across the Atlantic. Italy was furious. Diplomatic relations between Italy and the United States were temporarily broken. There were even fears of war between the two countries. Think about that. A mob killed Italian immigrants in America. And the crisis became so serious that two nations nearly broke apart diplomatically. But the violence did not stop there. In the 1890s alone, more than 20 Italians were lynched in the United States. This is the part of Italian American history that rarely appears in movies. Before the romance.
Before the restaurants. Before the celebrities. Before the proud Italian American identity. There was humiliation. There was fear. There was silence. Italian immigrants were not just fighting poverty. They were fighting the idea that they were naturally inferior. In the early 20th century, American immigration debates were influenced by racial theories and eugenics. Southern Italians were often placed at the bottom of this imaginary hierarchy. They were European, but not treated like the right kind of European. They were legally classified as white in many contexts. But socially, they were often viewed as racially suspicious, foreign, and inferior. That is why this story is uncomfortable. Because today, many people look back and assume Italians were always accepted in America. But acceptance was not automatic. It had to be negotiated. It had to be earned. And sometimes, it came at a painful price. Many Italian immigrants changed their names. They stopped speaking dialects in public. They told their children to speak only English. They avoided showing too much Italian pride. They tried to become invisible. Because visibility could be dangerous. An Italian surname could cost you a job. An accent could make you a target. A neighborhood could be called a slum. A family tradition could be mocked as backward. And yet, Italians survived. They built churches. They opened bakeries. They created mutual aid societies. They formed neighborhoods. They sent their children to school. They fought in American wars. They became workers, teachers, judges, athletes, musicians, actors, mayors, governors, and icons. The same country that once feared Italians eventually fell in love with Italian culture.
The food that was mocked became comfort food. The accents that were ridiculed became part of comedy and cinema. The family loyalty that was treated as suspicious became a symbol of warmth. The names that once sounded foreign became American names. But we should never forget what came before. Because the story of Italians in America is not just a success story. It is also a story of prejudice, a story of survival, a story of people who crossed an ocean looking for dignity
and found themselves accused before they were understood. So the next time someone says Italians were always loved in America, remember New Orleans. Remember the workers. Remember the insults. Remember the families who changed their names to protect their children. Remember that before Italian became cool, it was dangerous. Before it became pride, it was shame. Before America loved Italians, America hated them. And that is the Italian truth.